Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. And today, from DC Direct and DC Collectibles, we are taking a look at two Batman action figures as inspired by the Hush Batman storyline and as illustrated by artist Jim Lee. Alright, so we have two different figures right here, and we're going to have to jump into the time machine and travel back a couple of years. For the one on our right, this figure debuted back in 2003 and was part of the Hush line of action figures produced by DC Direct. And over here, we have the 2018 Batman Black and White, as inspired also by Hush and artist Jim Lee, and that I think was released by DC Collectibles. Both the same company. There was just a transition in the name of the company, I think, some years ago. DC Collectibles still exists, and they're distributed by McFarlane Toys. So enough about that. Let's talk about these figures. Right, so one of the reasons why we're looking at these figures today is because of the recent release of the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Hush Batman. I reviewed that figure previously. If you haven't seen that video, check it out. And when I was looking at that figure, I kind of like briefly showcased this one on our right and said that I'd eventually unbox and review it. So that's why we're taking a look at this figure today. I'm incredibly fond of the Hush storyline from the Batman monthly comic. It was done, I think, in 2002, written by Jeff Loeb, and like I mentioned, illustrated by Jim Lee. I've said this countless times. I think it was the defining Batman story for that generation. A lot of things, taken from that book are still kind of echoed today, in addition to like the Hush character himself. I think the overall tone of the way they presented Batman and the Batman family has carried over into modern Batman. This figure is really, really well done. In some ways, not in terms of like the actual engineering of the figure, but in some ways I think this is superior to the McFarlane one in the sense that this really looks more like a Jim Lee illustration brought to life than the McFarlane figure. Now, the McFarlane figure, it's top-notch. Everything about it is beautiful. It's well sculpted. Regardless if you got the black and gray version or the blue and gray version, both figures are standout pieces. But for me personally, as a fan of artist Jim Lee, I think this really captures and embodies Jim Lee's art style. The proportions, the musculature, the jawline, the horns, everything about this figure, it seems like the designer paid really close attention to kind of give you that Jim Lee artist experience. Not to take anything away from the McFarlane one, but this really does look like it kind of leapt out of like one of the panels from the comic book. The articulation extremely limited compared to the McFarlane one, and the engineering is definitely dated. Despite the sculpting being really well done, the articulations, it's not really, it's very, very restrictive in terms of making the character pose. You can't really, there's not a whole lot going on. It doesn't have a waist. And the only reason why this glove is articulated and not this one is because you can swap it out and give him the grapple gun over here. But the attention to detail, it's nice. And it's a beautiful figure. It comes with a nice display base, which depicts the updated Batman logo for back then. When Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee took over the monthly Batman book, they slapped on a new logo, and this was it. And I'm extremely fond of this Batman logo. I think it looks great. From a graphic design point of view, I think it's perfect. It frames the lettering perfectly. It presents Batman in a very comic book style illustration. And the contrast to positive space and negative space is just perfect. It's such a really, really well thought out logo. And a beautiful figure. For me, this is a nice historical piece. If you handed this to a younger collector nowadays, they'd probably scoff at the articulation and whatnot. But if you grew up during this time period, if you read Hush, on day one, you kind of know the significance of this piece, and it's nice. And it makes me really nostalgic for the older DC direct line of action figures. Some of the figures, they don't age well in the sense that, some of the plastics start degrading. Like this cape material, I'm very fortunate that mine's nice, but I've seen some where the capes are practically melting and the paint's like turning into goo and coming off. And as you can see here, it gets kind of scuffed up also. But excellent piece. If this is a toy that you bought back in the day or you still have in your collection, dust it off and give it some love. It's awesome. I love this figure so much. And that brings us next to this. This was also inspired by the Hush storyline and Jim Lee's design. When this came out in 2018, I kind of thought that this might have just been a re-release and this repaint of the original figure. But it's not. It seems like it takes inspiration from this figure, but it's a completely, I think, new mold. Like, for example, the original figure here, the emblem is actually scribed into his chest. You can actually see the scribe lines. Whereas on the updated 2018 figure, it's just simply painted on. Some pieces, even though they look the same, they're actually a little bit different. But the black and white piece is definitely an awesome figure. I do think you could buy this figure, an actually colorized version of it. I think it belonged to the designer series. But it's great. I love this figure. And it comes with a display base also, the Batman black and white logo. And if you're unfamiliar, there's actually an anthology series. I don't know if DC still puts it out. But back in the day, like every so often, they'd release this limited series called Batman Black and White. And they'd kind of pull in like the big major heavy-hitting talent in the comic book industry. And, they present their take on the Batman universe. Whether it was a short story or even just a pinup illustration. You had guys like Katsuhiro Otomo, known for Akira, do a Batman story or an illustration. And this is kind of cool. You'd see people that maybe they were associated with Marvel jump in and do a Batman story. So it's kind of cool. So if you're a comic book reader, seek out that anthology series, Batman Black and White. I want to say maybe there were at least 3 volumes. But it's a fun read. And if you're an art lover, even better. So yeah, 2 different interpretations of the Batman Hush character. Each one I think is well worth the purchase. If you grew up during this time period, you're going to be very sentimental, for these figures. And like I said, the McFarlane one, they're great. I love them. I think it's fantastic. It's a marvel in terms of like where action figure engineering is now compared to like back then. But if this is the Batman of your childhood or maybe during your college days, this figure might be worth hunting down. And if you, like I said, if you still have it in your collection, dust it off. Give it some love. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's no longer good. I think some things, age nicely like a fine wine. And I think some of these DC direct and collectible figures definitely do. They have a different signature and feel to them than like some of these modern toys. And the presentation's always just really well done. Alright, so I'm kind of babbling, but I just wanted to share this with you. Very fond of this time period. I love the Hush storyline. It's one of those comics that I bought multiple times over. I bought the trade paperbacks probably like 3 times over. I've bought like the super expensive artist editions that are black and white with just the pencil artwork. I don't know. I just have such a fond memory of DC Comics during the early 2000s. Alright, so with that being said, let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. Alright, later.